Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome, everyone. I am Kevin Tarachano, the chair of the UCLA Meyer and Rini Luskin Department of History. And this is the first Future of History conference featuring some of our excellent faculty and a distinguished guest, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Lonnie Bunch III. We came up with the idea for this conference at a dinner last year with Meyer and Rini to celebrate their endowed gift to our history department. This was their second major gift to our department, the first being the establishment of the Luskin Center for History and Policy in 2017, directed by our colleague, Professor David Myers. We agreed that the best way to commemorate this generous gift was to talk about history, the future of our profession, the importance of public history and policy that is informed by historical research. Since that time, the need for such a discussion and strategic planning has become more pressing than ever, as our university is being attacked by those who know little about history or education. These are challenging times, but we remain optimistic and focused. And thanks to our great friends, Meyer and Rini, the future of history at UCLA is so much brighter because of their genuine regard. Because of their genuine regard for the importance of history and their concern for the future of our democracy. Thank you, dear Meyer and Rini. I should add that the Luskins have also contributed to this special event today, for which we are very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now have the honor and pleasure of introducing an esteemed UCLA leader, Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Darnell Hunt, Professor of Sociology and African American Studies, who has served as Interim Chancellor and Dean of the Division of Social Sciences. He is a real Bruin who has received his PhD here at UCLA and joined our faculty in 2001. Nobody is more dedicated to our university. We appreciate him and his service. And so please welcome our colleague, Darnell Hunt.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate that. And welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to join you for what promises to be an inspiring conversation about the future of history. Bringing together brilliant minds in the spirit of inquiry and dialogue is one of the things that UCLA does best. Another, I'd argue, is study history itself. You need only look at the stunning range of talent and expertise reflected on our history faculty to see that. And all of you are here in the room, so really happy to see you. Now more than ever, listening to the voices of the past requires dedication, patience, empathy, and care. History allows us to reach across generations, to hear the echoes of those who came before us, to learn from their struggles and triumphs, and to carry their wisdom forward. Understanding who we have been is essential to understanding who we are and who we aspire to become. A wise man once said, quote, "It's going to be a dangerous outcome if people continue to get caught up in daily and transitory events without a true vision of where we've been and where we're going," unquote. That wise man was a UCLA alumnus who majored in history, whose name is Meyer Luskin. You remember saying that, Meyer? Meyer and Rini Luskin are people of true vision. They are both able to look backward and forward, grounded in knowledge of the past and animated by a belief in the future. Their generosity has transformed UCLA in so many ways. In addition to founding the Luskin Center for History and Policy, they have strengthened our work across the arts, health, law, public affairs, and more. The very conference center in which we meet today bears their name. Beyond philanthropy, the Luskins also help guide our university, serving on the UCLA Foundation Board, the Center for the Art of Performance Board, and the UCLA Santa Monica Medical Center Board. Their giving and partnership have empowered countless students, faculty, and staff to pursue their dreams. Myra and Rennie, your generosity has ensured that UCLA will continue to inspire generations to come. We are honored that the History Department, for which you have done so much, now bears your name. On behalf of the entire university, thank you. So we are equally honored this afternoon to welcome a truly remarkable guest, Secretary Lonnie G. Bunch III, the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. Right. It is wonderful that we have such an esteemed speaker and one of our nation's leading historians and cultural luminaries sharing his insights today. We'll hear more about Secretary Bunch later in the program, but for now, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our first panel, Professor Brenda Stevenson, who will lead a discussion between members of the UCLA History faculty. A distinguished professor in the Nichol Family Endowed Chair in History, Professor Stevenson is an internationally recognized scholar whose work bridges race, slavery, gender, family, and community in the United States and beyond. She has served as chair of both the History Department and the Interdepartmental Program in African American Studies, and she is a distinguished lecturer for both the Organization of American Historians and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Her research has generated numerous prizes, including the James A. Raleigh Prize from the Organization of American Historians for the Best Book in Race Relations, the Ida B. Wells Barnett Award for Bravery in Journalism, and the Gustavus Meyer Outstanding Book Prize. Professor Stevenson's intellectual leadership has helped shape the new generation of scholars engaging with issues of race, gender, family, and justice. We're delighted to have her lead this conversation. Thank you all again for being here. And now, please join me in welcoming Professor Brenda Stevenson.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to present my panelists. I begin with Professor Kelly Lytle Hernández, who holds the Thomas E. Lifka Endowed Chair in History at UCLA. One of the nation's leading experts on race, immigration, and mass incarceration, she is the founder of $1 Million Hoods, which maps the fiscal and human costs of mass incarceration in Los Angeles. The co-founder of Mapping Deportations, which has mapped every deportation in U.S. history. Everyone. And the author of the prize-winning books, Migra, A History of the U.S. Border Patrol, City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Empire, and the Revolution in the Borderlands, and, I messed that up. Start again. City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles, which was published in 2017, and Bad Mexicans, Race, Empire, and Revolution in the Borderlands, published in 2022. Her forthcoming book, A Dangerous and Despotic Power, 2 Centuries of U.S. Immigration Control, will be published by Norton in December 2026. In 2019, Professor Lytle Hernández was named a MacArthur Genius Fellow. She is also an elected member of the Society of American Historians, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Pulitzer Prize Board. We look forward to your comments, Kelly. Next, we have the distinguished Professor Sanjay Subrahmanyam, who is a distinguished professor of history and the Irvin and Jean Stone Chair in Social Sciences at UCLA. A specialist of the early modern period, he has taught in Delhi, Lisbon, Oxford, and Paris, to name a few places. He is the author of several works ranging between studies of India and the Indian Ocean, the early modern European empires, and reflections on global history as a field of research. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, we have a young member of our faculty here to tell us what we can't know any longer because we're too old. But at any rate, she is going to help us with that. Her name is Professor Vivien Tejada. She's a scholar of the 19th century U.S. with a focus on the Civil War era. She's very new in our department, 2 years out of Duke, right? Yes. Overall, her research interests lie in the intersections between Native American history and African American history. Her current project, Unfree Soil, Empire, Labor, and Coercion in the Upper Mississippi River Valley, 1812 to 1861, examines the relationship between slavery and conquest in the Upper Midwest. She also is engaged in research on Native Americans' adoption of U.S. citizenship prior to the passage of the 14th Amendment and, more broadly, the ambiguities of citizenship in the early republic. Her citizenship in the Cherokee Nation lies at the core of her research agenda. So, we're going to begin today by having our distinguished panelists come up or sit at your seats. You have a microphone there, whatever you prefer, and talk 3 to 4 minutes about their own research and how their research has both, helped us to have a distinguished past in history scholarship and looks forward to the future. So we begin with Professor Lytle Hernández.
Okie dokie. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so my name is Kelly Lytle Hernández, and I work mostly on issues of race, immigration, and the carceral state. And I've really tried to develop my careers in ways that emerge out of the academy and that abide by the rules of the academy, certainly in terms of the rigor of the scholarship, but that speaks to much broader audiences. I've tried to do that in my writing, but also in developing new skill sets around data visualization and data analysis in particular. So I thought I would speak a little bit about the public-facing projects that I have been engaged in and the way that I'm trying to shape national and at times international conversations about some of the core social issues or problems we are facing today. So, when we were still talking about mass incarceration and ending it back up to about 7 months ago, I had really, y'all laughing, this is not funny, right? I had dedicated myself and my career really to trying to understand the roots of mass incarceration, where it comes from, and also telling stories that help us as people who are opposed to caging our fellow human beings to stand together on the front lines of social movements. And for me, that meant that we needed to tell stories in which we share histories together, in which we have challenged foes together, and that we have won together. So I wrote a book about the rise of mass incarceration here in Los Angeles, but in particular, tried to develop this thing called the Rebel Archive, that the people who have fought mass incarceration, and at times we have won some of those fights, how we did it over time, how we saw each other across divides, and how we built strength and power together. Coming out of writing that book, which came out in 2017, I realized I had diagnosed a problem, as many people have had. We have this thing called mass incarceration. We lock up too many people. It costs too much, and it gets us nothing but pain out of it. But I wasn't engaged in the movement, right? I wasn't at the front lines of that movement. I was still an ivory tower academic. And so I began with a sabbatical, actually, and I embedded with community organizations. All I did was I listened very carefully to how they work, what they demanded, and what they needed out of us in the academy. It was out of that year sabbatical that I developed this project called $1 Million Hoods, which we acquired all of the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department arrest and prison data, and then mapped how much we're spending locally to lock people up. That project became quite influential in terms of helping to shape statewide legislation to change, to move us toward bail reform, to decriminalizing many of our students in the local school district, LAUSD, and many other ways. So it's really by using my historical knowledge, but then saying it's not enough, right? The reading and the writing is not enough. We've got to work in collaboration with community organizations and develop products that are meaningful to them and that they can leverage and utilize to go to Congress, to go to the state legislature, to go to city council, wherever it is, to demand and fight for changes. Do I have more time or should I cut it there?
You can stop there.
I don't challenge Brenda Stevenson. Thank you.
We will hear much more about Kelly's work later on in the conversation, all right? But I want to give Professor Subrahmanyam a chance to talk about his work as well.
Now, as some of you would have realized, I am the member of this panel who was not born in this country. Actually, we are about, I would say, roughly 1/4 of this department of history made up of people who were not born in this country, which is actually not unusual. And if I'm not mistaken, when I joined this department in 2004, the proportion was actually even higher, even though we were a larger department. And that is because we are a department which then, and I think even today, has the ambition of addressing a worldwide audience, and also, I think, has the ambition of addressing a worldwide history. So I was very pleased when I joined this department, of course, to have my colleagues in American history, because where I had taught before in Europe and in India, typically we had very few American historians there. But I was also very pleased to have historians who covered everything from the Middle East to China, to Japan, to Africa. We had at that time a very, very powerful, and which still remains an appreciable African history part of our department, a field of our department. So it was for me, and Latin America, it was for me a really refreshing thing to have the possibility of having all these conversations. And that is, I think, what I have considered to be the principal task that I've tried to address in the 20 plus years that I've been in this department, to be basically in conversation with people doing the history of various parts of the world. Now, I do that, of course, by doing my own research. I publish on South Asia and the Indian Ocean. I publish on Europe. I occasionally publish even on Latin America. But I also make it a point to not only teach over here. Every year I travel. I teach a lot in other countries as well, usually short stints. I teach often in Europe. Not long ago, I've been in South America doing some teaching. And so part of my way of looking at this whole question of who we are as historians is actually in that framework to ask ourselves whether what we are perhaps going through today in this country has some parallels elsewhere in the world, whether those parallels and experiences have anything to teach us, and whether, in fact, we can draw upon that wider experience as well. I can tell you that when you have been in the museum in Santiago de Chile, where the whole oppression of Allende's regime is remembered, it gives you a slightly different perspective on political changes. So that's essentially what I try to do. I'm an early modern historian, which is I rarely cross this side of 1800. Most of my work is between about 1400 and 1800. So a lot of people would consider that a little bit fusty and dusty. But truth be told, I think that long perspective also has its place in the discussions that we're going to have today. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Tejada.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. So I'm Vivien Tejada. I work, as Brenda mentioned, on the intersections between Black and Native American history, and a lot of my research currently focuses on the federal government's use of slave labor in the upper Midwest, what's considered the free North. And I argue this use of slavery was to colonize the region and incorporate it into the United States. So I'm finding evidence of that in the federal archives. So I'm spending a lot of time in these DC archives that are currently shut down. But what I also, I joined the history department just a year ago. And so I think one of the perspectives I bring to this panel is quite literally the future of history, because my career is almost wholly in the future and not the past. And so one of the things I've been thinking about in the lead up to this event is that I was on the job market in 2023, which seems like a lifetime ago. And it was 3 years out from the uprisings following George Floyd's murder. And this was a moment in US history when I think a lot of Americans actually wanted to grapple with the history of injustice and the past of this nation. And universities took that into consideration and took stock of their existing history departments and more broadly other departments, and undertook these massive initiatives to hire people who could teach Black history, Native American history, Latinx history. And so when I was on the job market, it was quite a plethora of jobs that I could apply to in my fields. And yet I have peers, it's a totally different picture now, just 1 or 2 years later, where these jobs, both because of budget cuts, but also explicit attacks on DEI, have dried up. And so when I think about the future of history, I get concerned about what it looks like when these individuals aren't going to have the institutional places and resources to be able to do their research. So I think I have been thinking a lot about how our work takes a long time, and the seeds planted now are going to be the narratives that our K through 12 students get in 20 years. And so how can we act now in the same way that those who want to create so-called patriotic histories are acting on the present to shape the future? What is our response going to be when 2020 looks like a totally different lifetime only 3 years ago? So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Well, Vivien has brought us really to our first question, which is the ways in which we believe that one's status within the profession is going to be impacted by the kind of oversight and attempted government oversight and control of research and instructional topics and perspectives. I mean, we're all at different phases in our careers. So, I would ask that we start with Kelly and talk a little bit about that, and then we'll move on to Sanjay and Vivien.
Okay. Well, I think it's an all hands on deck situation, and we all need to work from where we're at. And I have been blessed to be able to work in the sphere of, I wouldn't call it public history as we define it in the academy, but histories told and co-created with broader constituencies. Mm-hmm. And so I see that's where I'm leaning in for the next 10 to 15 for 20 years, is the ways I came here today actually just after having a meeting with the Zinn Education Project, which works with teachers across the country to make sure that they have lesson plans and primary sources in their hands to tell the stories that we need to retain and continue to develop for the next 20 years. That is the kind of work that I'm going to be fully in for the next 20 years to make sure that we're confronting this immediate crisis.
Great. Thank you. Sanjay.
Yeah, partly because of the period on which I work and partly because of the places in the world on which I work, the impact is going to be somewhat different, which is I imagine that there's less likely to be direct hostility to some of the kinds of things that people like me and people I work with do. But on the other hand, for us, the real actually danger is that we will be forgotten. And we will be neglected and forgotten, and no resources will be devoted to these kinds of things that we do. I mean, I want to remind you that after the Second World War and in the course of the 50s and 60s, I mean, the US built up one of the most massive bodies of investment in studying the world and the world's history. Right? If you take the top 20, 25 US universities, there was massive investment in this. Now, not all of this was done with pure intentions. not all of this was meant to create pure outcomes either, right? We know there's enough investigation of various projects of this kind. But on the other hand, the answer to that lack of pure intentions is not to say, well, let's just strike all these places off the map and pretend they don't exist anymore, and pretend they don't count for us. So I think that is, for me, the real question, which comes to that, if it comes to doing various things, studying quote-unquote exotic languages, which once was a great strength of this country. Will that be funded anymore? Will people be sent on one study abroad for a year, 2 years, for example, or will we be brought to the situation where, for instance, in the UK, today, if you want to do a PhD in the UK, you do not have time to learn a language. You either know the language before you start, or you don't know the language. But you don't have the time to learn the language. So, I think that this is a different kind of problem than being on the firing line, right? But, there's also something called death by 1,000 cuts.
Right. Thank you. Vivien?
Yeah, that reminds me, there in graduate school, there would be sort of lore that in the past you could spend 9 to 10 years completing your PhD, when schools are now trying to push them to be 5-year programs. So of course you can't learn a language in that amount of time, let alone do primary research in that language. But I think to Sanjay's other points, it's structural, so its history as a discipline as a whole might be forgotten, in addition to the particular attacks on, telling anti-American narratives that we see.
Well, I want to thank you all. I want to focus a little bit on Sanjay for a moment, and then everybody else can add in. But I want to ask you particularly, what are the International Academy's perspectives with regard to the current debate on history as a discipline in the United States, as both scholarly research and a fundamental era of learning, both for K through 12 schools and colleges and universities? What are people at Oxford and Paris and Chile, what are they saying about, since you've visited there recently, about what's going on here?
Yeah, well, as many of you will know, the US in those decades that I was talking about was also a great magnet for training students. And it remains to some extent the case even today. Plenty of Chinese come here to study Chinese history for their PhDs. Plenty of Africans come here to do African history and so on and so forth. And also people come actually from these countries to study other histories, not only their own, right? Which is also an interesting feature. So I think that there is a real worry, and I'm hearing this worry even, in terms of people writing to me saying, what is going to happen? Is your graduate program going to remain in place? Is there going to be place anymore for foreign students in this university? Because, already, by the way, there are some of the major universities across the country which have announced that there will be no graduate admissions the coming year. This has been announced. We haven't announced it, but other places have, right? So this is one kind of worry. I have to say, in some places, notably in Europe, but perhaps a little bit in China, there's maybe a little bit of what is called Schadenfreude. And there is a sentiment that if this is going to be the way it is in the United States, maybe this is an opportunity to recruit people.
Right.
There's a certain amount of movement going on internationally in this respect. Of course, it's not only in our disciplines. Probably historians are pretty low on that set of priorities compared to computer scientists and mathematicians and so on. But I mean, even we are, we're not completely out of the picture. So there is that other side of it. And I think, in a way, what is the real worry is that in many parts of the world, and I'm thinking even of places like, Japan and so on, I mean, the American university was held up as a kind of a model of a level of resources and investment which they could barely aspire to, but they hope to. Because, the Japanese, for instance, they punch way above their weight in terms of what they cover. The Japanese are probably maybe the only country, to my mind, besides maybe Canada, comparable to the US in what they cover in terms of history. right? And they always look to the US, and maybe they'll start looking elsewhere. I don't know.
Thank you. Well, Kelly, I wanted to go back to big data, which is what you've been working with a lot and continue to do so. What is the future of microphone, please? Yes, I am speaking to the microphone, but it's a little low. Yes, big data and where we are. Where is big data going? What do you see the future of big data with regard to history projects?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I don't think there's any moving back from it. I would
Good.
encourage us to, skill. Yeah, she said, what's the kind of future of big data in history? Because I've been working on big data projects. I would encourage us to develop our skill sets. Big data is really, it's not that hard to work with, right? It is a language that needs to be learned, essentially. There's a lot of historical material, the slave trade, for example, that could benefit from big data skills and visualizations. The big data question also leads me to, I think there are just various terrains that we need to expand into as historians, whether that's big data, whether that's the 250th anniversary is coming up and the debates over monuments and memorials and all of these things that aren't quite how we have really organized our thinking and our research as academic scholars. We're going to have to spread our wings a little bit in a moment like this to verify, to prove, to imprint our power, our perspective, why history matters, how it helps to shape our thinking of the present, help it build our plans for the future. So big data will be one of those tools. I encourage, if there's any students out there, take the classes in data science. The Social Sciences Division offers a master's in big data and society. I would encourage people to get into it.
Thank you. Well, this is a question for the entire panel. Can you hear me, first of all? You can hear now. Thank you. How will large history projects be shaped to answer the call for patriotic national history? How can large public history projects be used to keep history more inclusive?
Well, I think there's so much room for public-facing history to reach broader audiences than we can necessarily in the academy. And to get to the second part of the question, to think about how we can tell more inclusive histories through public history, there's a really great program that the National Park Service put together with Mellon Foundation funding. And basically, recent PhD graduates were getting these fellowships and doing quite cutting-edge and innovative research projects located at parks, historical sites all over the country. So rural Wisconsin, the Chesapeake Bay, doing research on how treaties shaped these lands, or how enslaved men who fought in the War of 1812 created diasporas after their emancipation through military service. These really cool projects that were then, added to signage, interpretive sites that people with families and children might just see on the weekends. That would reach more people than I think my book might. And so I've had several friends do that program and really enjoy it. And of course, with cuts on federal spending, that program has recently ended. So, I'm hopeful that that's a model that we can return to. Like, looking at a lot of my peers, it's a career that they seriously considered at the end of their graduate school education. And so what can we do to get these fellowships up and running again?
Yeah, if I could just sort of offer a bit of the bigger geographical perspective again. So, I don't know how many of you follow the situation in India, right? So in India now, for the last, getting on about 10 years, we have a party in power, which is certainly quite far to the right of center, democratically elected, but far to the right of center. And one of the things which they took on themselves as a big agenda was to change the way in which history was taught. What did they do? Basically, what they wanted to do was they started at the school level and then they continued all the way up. So, for example, they want to excise certain chapters from the school level textbooks. they want to, it'll sound familiar to you. It's happened some thousands of miles away, but it'll sound familiar, right? They wanted to do that. Then, because a lot of the universities in India are public universities, they wanted to ensure that funding was not given to certain types of projects. So you do that, you remove things, you push people away from things, you exert pressure on publishers about what they can and they can't publish, though there's still officially no censorship in India, right? So you can see some of these things happen. And the way how do people get around it? Well, people find ways. So for instance, in India, one of the plays is that over the years, there's many more private universities have come up now compared to a situation where they used to be purely public universities. The problem is that private capitalists sometimes are also subject to pressures, in fact, perhaps more than normal human beings, and will sometimes toe the line. So it's not because you're in a private university that you're absolutely, So you can see there are strategies, again, strategies to publish, then you don't publish in India necessarily, you publish somewhere else. So, there's lots of things which a famous American political scientist called the weapons of the weak, right? So there are ways around it, and we can see it in other countries.
Yeah, actually, to add to that point, a friend in India had to change her research project because of archive access being cut off to a certain selection of documents.
That's another place to control people.
And so, but potentially that's the future, is these big digital projects that make these sources available to the public that you can't cut off as easily.
Do you think that these large projects will be cut off, though, that data access will be limited in the future? Can you see that happening, Kelly?
Oh, yeah. It's happening in front of our eyes, right? I think what I would add to this conversation is that a lot of the public history that needs to be happening now isn't going to result in a big public project, whether it's a big data website or a museum exhibit. And let me give you an example from history that a group of us are working with now to develop a new public history project. So one of the most effective public history projects in U.S. history certainly is the crafting of the idea that the United States is a nation of immigrants. That was a creation of JFK and the ADL in the 1950s and the early 1960s as they were pushing for immigration reform, namely to change the immigration laws that locked out immigrants arriving from Southern and Eastern Europe and to open up those pathways. Historians wrote that narrative, that gave it to JFK, and that together they went out and they changed the national narrative about what immigration is and who immigrants are in this country, which led to change in the law. Well, I have concerns about that framework. I think it's essentially a white nationalist framework, but we can talk about that in question and answer. But the idea that historians can be working in collaboration with legislators and others to recraft the story of the United States, who we are as a people right now, is really important. So some of the things that I'm working on with people is embedding historians and community-based organizations across the country so they can listen very carefully to the stories of Cambodian immigrants, the stories of Mexican immigrants, everybody, right? And then we convene, we bring those stories together, we put them into conversation with what we know as academic scholars from the archives, and we're recrafting the slogan. Like the outcome of this 3-5 year project is not going to be a book, it's not going to be a website, it's going to be a new slogan that can be used on placards when you go to marches. We're going to take away Nation of Immigrants, we're going to build something more inclusive, and that speaks into not our exclusionary tendencies in American history, which are very real, right? But who we are as rebels, right? Who we are as migrants, who we are the people who have really fought for the dreams of freedom and equity, and to hold on to that in a slogan framework. So these are other public history projects that the outcomes look way different than anything that we're really considering in the academy right now. There's songs, there's slogans, there's all kinds of things that we can be doing when we open up our aperture and we work in close collaboration with the people on the ground.
Sounds like the abolitionist movement.
What?
But what I wanted to ask next is, what are some of the internal problems of the history profession in terms of, looking forward to the future? What are some of the things that we need to, that's not coming from the government, for example, but are within the profession itself that we could work on? Vivien, you want to take that?
Sure. So I think in the field of Native American history right now, there's a hesitancy on the parts of some scholars, and this might be happening beyond my field too, but to do community engaged research that's in tune with the present day needs of tribal communities. And the argument that they make is that you can't be an objective historian if you're in communication with community members, or that you might present a biased view of history. I'm in the other camp, which is to say, I think there's something particular about Native American history. I find that what we write about could be used in present day legal decisions, treaty enforcement, whether a tribe is going to get an object back from a museum or not. And so to ignore that reality is to ignore the actual operations of history. But it's a present divide that it does exist between historians right now. And so there is infighting. But I think we just have to recognize that we do shape the present moment with what we write.
Sanjay?
Yeah, actually, on this very campus, as some of you will know, there was a very famous debate which took place about, objectivity in history and so on, in which one faculty member and one former faculty member took part, Carlo Ginzburg and Hayden White. Now, that debate has not actually disappeared, because I think part of the problem is this, that what we've all realized is that if from a certain philosophical point of view, people pushed ideas about fairly extreme relativism with regard to truth and truth claims and so on and so forth, and it was a philosophical position which seemed very sexy at a certain time. The problem is that this kind of thing actually has political consequences. And when it gets into the hands of people who actually have very different notion of what they intend to use truth claims for, then you wind up facing a little bit of difficulty in the face of that argument. So I think we have to come back to that debate, not go back to it in terms of repeating it, but we have to update that debate and continue to think about what we as historians can and should make as truth claims. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's one point. And the second point which I want to make is coming back to the big data question. Now, there is a trend in some parts of the world now towards a lot of big data history. For instance, in Europe, now, there is something called the European Research Council, which is one of the biggest organizations which funds history. But the problem is it only funds history when the projects are 4 million, 5 million, 6 million. Now, I wouldn't know how to spend $4 million on a history project if my life depended on it.
I got you.
Yeah. So actually what happens is it means that it privileges projects which know how to spend that kind of money. You see what I mean? So I think that what is actually important is, in the face of that, also to keep the other thing going, which is, rather than just what people call distant reading, also close reading, mm-hmm. right? So we need to keep ourselves also, I think the day when the historian who is an artisan disappears, we are in big trouble. So I want to keep artisanal history alive also, right? Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is part of the future, the struggle. And I don't think that these are contradictory, but I think that each approach must find a place for the other one.
Yeah, I would just second what Sanjay is saying. As someone who's doing sort of the public-facing work, I think what we do in the academy is beautiful, right? I don't know who else has the time and up to this point, the resources to go in deep and look at every piece of paper, every song that was ever sang, every painting that was ever painted, and craft slowly over time these slow shifts, a little bit of new information here, a new archive that was found, a little bit of a new perspective that comes in. And all of a sudden, 15 years later, you get a dramatic revision, right, of what we thought happened and how it happened and who was involved and who wasn't involved. So that doesn't happen anywhere outside of the academy. And so our ability to engage in historical thinking, analysis, revision, I think will disappear, or we'll have to figure out other ways to do it. Right now it's happening in the academy, and I want to fight to preserve that. As much as I'm doing the public history work, it is vital that we continue to invest in the archival work, the deep archival work, the artisan historian work. Absolutely.
So if we weren't having this moment in history, this particular moment in history, and we didn't have this administration, and then we were having this conference on the future of history, what would we be talking about? What would we be talking about then? Yes.
Well, of course, it is precisely what people talk about elsewhere in the world where they don't have this administration, right?
Right.
So, and conversations constantly go on. Not that everybody else's administration is wonderful, right?
Right.
So, I mean, if you were in France today, I mean, you would be having a pretty muscular conversation between, for example, a set of far-right parties which are planning imminently to come to power in the next election and whose main plank is immigration, right? And so the main thing they want to have rewritten is the way in which immigration history is written, right? And the contribution of immigrants is written. Of course, those are very different immigrants than the ones we have in this country. They tend to focus on the former colonies of France. So it's also then it becomes a debate about French colonialism, right? So those are the kinds of debates which one might be having if you were in France, if you were in Britain, again, very much the former colonies. And so if you were in India today, I mean, I think the questions would be, for example, very strongly centered on religious identity. Which is to say the position of Muslims in India, where they stand in regard to the history. These are the hot button issues. Mm-hmm. So I mean, everybody has their political hot button issues, irrespective of where you are. But I mean, you can see sometimes that there are some surprising overlaps and convergences. Mm-hmm.
Though I think if we were to take the political moment, even globally outside of it, I think we'd be spending a lot more time talking about AI, which I think is something that is going to catch up to us. And I mean, I think also there's the issue of students losing the ability to critically think and trust themselves. And one thing that I have been toying with is, posing questions to ChatGPT. It's generating its answers based on, you could have the issue of privacy that it's been scraping ProQuest and dissertation data. But currently it is generating answers based on what professional historians have written. These are privately owned companies that could gain students' trust and usage and then just completely shift the source material that's generating these answers. So I think we would be talking a lot about AI and how we're going to prep our students and respond to this new tool that isn't going away.
Very good.
I had a similar thought. I think we'd be talking about literacy a lot more, that we're really struggling with textual literacy. So it's related to the AI question. I will also say that I think we would still be talking about immigration in this country if we go back to, 2024 October or something like that. But we'd be talking about it with a lot less clarity. Mm-hmm. What has happened in this moment is just crystal clear clarity as to what, and the problem isn't immigration, the problem is immigration enforcement. And we've gotten really clear about who's being targeted, how they're being targeted, how the immigration regime operates really under the forms of plenary power. It's really despotic in many ways. Mm-hmm. So thank you for clarifying the moment. Now we get to work, right?
Okay, well, I want to thank my panelists very much and now open it up for Q&A. Yes, in the front row. Second row, sorry. Hi.
So you,
Tawny.
yeah.
Yes.
You've all spoken so eloquently about scholarship and public engagement. But surely one of the biggest impacts that we have in this history department is through our teaching, our undergraduate teaching. Thousands of students every year take history courses. So I'd like the people to reflect on what students of history should be learning, where you think kind of the future of history education should be going.
She wants to know, because we teach so many students, what we should be teaching them and what should they be learning in our classes.
I got an answer. And I want to teach this class, so you and I can talk. Writing.
Yeah.
We do not do enough teaching of writing, and in particular narrative forms, so that we can get outside of our silos. I would love to see us, not just as a history department at UCLA, but I mean, we have a writing center actually, but as a profession, as a departments across the country, to really work with our undergraduate and our graduate students on how to tell a story. And in addition to our writing, then how do you stand up and you share it, right? We've got to become better storytellers. And that's in the craft, right, of the writing.
Yeah, actually, some of my most rewarding results in terms of undergraduate teaching was in terms of students who became journalists. And, of course, we would like some of them to go to grad school and all that. But actually, the ones who became journalists, sometimes I realized, you can see the imprint that classes leave on them. And actually, you can see the imprint that they leave on a much larger public. And I mean, journalists today, I would include people doing podcasts, et cetera, they're much larger than just print journalism. And so that is actually something which I would like to be able to, in a way, continue and reinforce in this department, which is to continue something which I said in my kind of opening remarks, which is giving people in this students in this department a real opening into the whole world. So that they actually have a curiosity about the whole world and also have some competence to approach problems having to do with places which are very far away from here, right? And I think the little sub point which I would also make to them is an insistence, for example, which I always insist. I teach, a big Indian history survey course. And there's always a question in the beginning of the course, which is students come to me and say, I have nothing to do with India. My parents are not from India. I'm not from India, anything. And they ask, is your course only really meant for what they call heritage students? And I say to them, God forbid, right? This is not just meant for heritage students. I have nothing against heritage students, and I think they actually sometimes enrich the discussion. But it should be open to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing I would add is that teaching textual literacy, I think, is really important. So being able to tell stories, but also doing it with primary sources. And we have students going to journalism, history, but also students leaving anything like history after they graduate, still having the ability to critically examine news sources or anything that they're reading, and then communicate that to their friends and family and make persuasive arguments.
Thank you. Ellen?
Well, I hope this won't be taken as too provocative, but I really wonder what you think the responsibility of the academy is and academics in creating something which allowed for this attack on something called wokeism. Have we been it's sort of the opposite of what you were saying, Sanjay. Have we limited ourselves to teaching people their own history and not cultivating a global and universal sense of what we as humans need to understand as history? So I just wonder, do you have anything to say about where any responsibility we have for the attacks on woke?
I think one of the responsibilities we have with regard to the attack on the woke is not attacking back. I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in a place where, in segregation, I grew up in a place where we learned nothing about Black people whatsoever. And it wasn't really until I went to college, the University of Virginia, that I had an opportunity to learn anything about who I was. I was always learning about other people. I was not learning about who I was. And I think that wokeness, as it is defined so broadly in our society, has allowed us as Americans to learn about other people. I mean, if we go back to the way in which American history was taught when I was in high school or when I was in middle school or whatever, then we wouldn't know anything about anybody except for the people who lived in our neighborhood or lived in somebody else's neighborhood, but lived in our country. And we all think about the melting pot and how we're all just Americans, and there's, we all have the same goals and we have the same ideals, et cetera. So I've been very, concerned about people not striking back and not saying, wait a minute, just because you gave it a name, woke, doesn't mean that that's what it is. And it doesn't mean that that's what's wrong with the way in which we teach. I do think that, one of the things I love about UCLA and I love about our department in particular, I've always loved this, is the variety of courses we teach. As Sanjay indicated, we teach courses from all around the globe. And so part of it's choice. A lot of students are choosing to learn about themselves. And the reason when they come into our classes and they choose this class versus the other class, and one of the reasons why they choose to come into the classes that teach them about themselves is because they have not had the opportunity to learn about themselves prior to getting into our classes. So that's my response to it. And I feel very strongly about it because I think one of the things in which we do really well in the history department is to teach a variety of courses about a variety of peoples and experiences globally. And that any student who comes into our department has the opportunity to learn about themselves or to learn about someone else. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ellen, another way of thinking about what you put out as a question is this: it's a fairly well-known fact that, for example, in France, and this comes back to your earlier question, how do people look at America, the way in which history is done in America, and so on? I mean, the French have been typically very, very aggressive about what they think of as the excesses of identitarian history in America. Yeah. They like to attack this and make fun of it. What they offer is what they call universal history, which is, of course, it takes us back to the Enlightenment and Enlightenment claims of universalism and so on and so forth, right? So, but when you actually consider those two positions, right, the claim that there is something called a universal history, which is written from nowhere or written from another planet, right? Or as if the only alternative is a very, very narrow identitarian history, you realize that actually, both sides have a point and both sides are wrong as well, right? Because if we were to content ourselves with purely teaching identitarian histories, it would be no good either, right? And this is, to my mind, this is a very serious problem to which there are no easy answers, right? But it's something which we should all be struggling with when we teach. How do we balance between these two, distinct pulls that we have, right? And all of us, I think, suffer to some extent from having to answer to these two pulls, right? And I think that what actually happened, and which was really the problem, was that people just sort of engaged in a very grotesque caricature of one position,
right,
and managed to popularize that caricature. And that wasn't very helpful in terms of an intellectual debate, actually.
Yeah. Next question, Rini, did you have your hand up?
My first 14 years were in Boston. And I had so much repetition going on about colonial history that it was dreadful. It's as if the rest of the world didn't exist. And so I'm hoping that reaching students today, starting in elementary school and going all the way up, would have a much broader exposure to the world than I had when I was growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we're working towards. We're trying to push back on as well. Anybody else want to respond?
For the questions?
Okay, so the next question, please. Some people in the back over here, I think, on those rows.
Ladies first. Thank you. My question is to that first genius scholar in the black. You kind of blew my mind with the notion that we are not a nation of immigrants, and that shouldn't be the public story of who we are. I grew up in the era of the melting pot, which I always thought was kind of strange, but it's and I didn't know the story about how the immigrants story came about through Jack Kennedy. But could you give us a little more information about where you're headed with the new slogan? And I applaud you for trying to come up with one, because that does frame the issue so much in public content. And then, because I'm an inveterate reader of The Atlantic, I hope you write an article about this for The Atlantic, if you haven't already.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. And you cut me off when you're ready for me to be done. Okay? No. You stop me when I need to stop. So when the ADL and JFK came up with the notion of the Nation Anti-Defamation League, came up with the idea of the Nation of Immigrants, they were fighting against a system that we had in place called the National Quota System, which people, if you're not familiar with it, it sort of allocated a number of immigrant visas that prioritized and privileged immigrants coming from Northern and Western Europe, and deprioritized immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe within the national origin system. And they wanted to change that, right? Rightfully so. And so they came up with this idea that immigrants aren't a threat, right, to the United States. In fact, immigrants have helped to build this country, immigrants from many places. But in the way that they constructed that, immigrants from many places meant immigrants from Europe and only Europe. So you go back and read the book by JFK. There is no mention of immigrants from anywhere but Europe. And the entire debates around changing the national quota system was about ending the unfairness for Southern and Eastern Europeans, but not talking about immigrants from anywhere else. That is what I mean. It was about, so during the 1920s, Catholic immigrants, Jewish immigrants, people coming to Southern and Eastern Europe are regarded as sort of the darker whites or less white, right? You go through the Great Depression, you go through the New Deal, you go through World War II, you go through redlinings, you get up to the 1950s and 60s, you have a broader definition of whiteness. And so ending the national origin system is a part of sort of redefining whiteness. So that's why I'm saying that it, at its core, was about expanding the definition of who gets in, but keeping it limited to Europe. The way in which the law is crafted in 1965, which ended the national origin system, it is very specifically crafted to keep this country majority white. That they get rid of the national origin system and they say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a family preference system. So if you have family here today, which at that point about 93% of the immigrants in the United States or children of immigrants were from Europe, you have a priority of getting a visa coming into the United States. Now, they messed up. They forgot the United States was engaged in wars across Asia in particular. Right. And there were servicemen out there having babies everywhere. And they forgot that they were engaging in educational projects across Asia as well. And so very soon, in particular, you have a large number of Asian immigrants who are able to get access through the family reunification visas. Latino immigrants are largely locked out. That's why you have such a large number of undocumented immigrants who are coming from Mexico. It is virtually impossible after 1965, with the end of the national origin system, which was fought for under the Nation of Immigrants rubric, it is virtually impossible for Mexican immigrants to legally enter the United States. We can talk about all the details about that, But that is why you get sort of the explosion of undocumented immigration, because the ways in which the nation of immigrants myth led to changes in the national origin system that actually reified a whites-only immigration system that Asian immigrants were able to undo because of imperialism and wars, but Latino immigrants were not. So that's sort of what I'm getting at. And so what we can do now is so immigrants have held on to the nation of immigrants mythology, have sort of tried to rework it, absolutely, but we can do better, right? We can dig in, we can work together, we can say, well, this is the country we want to build collectively, where we are all welcome, where we all have opportunities for freedom and well-being. And it's going to require, I think, reckoning with how deeply rooted white nationalism, white supremacy is to this day in our immigration system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was talking about.
Thank you. That's great.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's a follow-up.
I'm just kind of kidding here, putting you on the spot. What are your top 3 choices of slogans that you might use?
I don't have them yet, but so that's the thing about.
Any suggestions?
Yeah, all right. Well, yeah. So you community embed. It really has to be something we collectively design and co-create. That's going to be most effective. So I don't have it yet, but give us 3 or 4 years. We'll be back.
Next question, please. Yes.
I'm sorry. Hi. I'm Dale Bell. I produced the movie Woodstock in 1970.
Woo!
Cool.
I didn't get there naturally. I was educated at Princeton in the Black neighborhood, which I deliberately sought out and was mentored by the Black community. It was almost as though the beloved community of John Lewis was there in Princeton. I left Princeton in 1960, worked in New York until JFK was killed. And that weekend, I was summoned in by the president of ABC because I spoke 4 languages, and they wanted somebody in the control room who could simultaneously translate what was being said about JFK and about the assassination in that weekend. Within a month, I was summoned to public television. And while I was at public television, I was mentored by and sought out Gordon Parks. And I mentored him so that he became the first Black producer, writer, composer, director in Hollywood, period, because of what I had done with him in New York. That trained me to become the Woodstock producer. And I just want you to think about what Jimi Hendrix is saying in his 3-minute, 47-second homage on August 18 at 9 o'clock in the morning. He is asking for a reconsideration of our Star-Spangled Banner as a national anthem. And people on stage playing with him said that to me. That's what they had rehearsed for 2 weeks prior to appearing at the festival. There is a phenomenon at work. It's the residue of the Woodstock Nation, if you will. We learned how to work together, and that's a model. I hope we can use it in the future. You might figure out how to make a new title. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question over with the. You need a microphone? They're going to send one to you.
It's wonderful. I appreciate what you just shared, and just thinking certainly the concept of woke, but we are looking at just everything that's been said. I see it within, and I love what you said about literary contextualization. But now we are in a moment where we're experiencing media capture. And so I think that really even intensifies the resistance to the pursuit of a fundamental understanding of how we got here.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Do you want a response to that?
Yes, well, because I heard, a lot of commentary in terms of what is in development, what the goals are, and certainly there's a dimension of creativity in that.
I was just looking something up.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think because we are centered in Los Angeles, which is the center of creativity in this country to a certain extent. And so, yes, the ways in which history is aligned with portrayals in the media is very, very important. And I think we've seen some improvements across time, but we're very much behind with regard to the kind of inclusive and nature of history, the way in which we want it to be taught, the way in which we want people to understand it, the way in which we want people to see themselves in the history. One of the good things about, the media, though, is the creative aspect of it. I mean, you can have something that is particularly accurate. You can have something that's slightly not accurate. You can have something that's really not accurate, but you have an opportunity to critique it, and to create something that's quite different. And when we talk about public history in particular, the media is very important. I support museums. I'm on boards of museums and, all kinds of other public institutions. But nothing gets to the world like media. Mm-hmm.
I would just add that there's a movement afoot across the country to reinvest in local journalism. Speaking, going to what Sanjay was saying earlier. And so here we have the LA Local, which is a new model of community newsrooms and neighborhoods across LA that do regional coverage that is just getting getting started. So you could also send them $10, support them. You could send them $50, whatever you got. But this is happening across the country. MacArthur Foundation and others are saying we've got to get out of sort of the conglomerates and return to local news is one thing. I also wanted to go I didn't talk on the woke thing. I want to say a little something about that. In addition to what everybody was saying, so I grew up on the U.S.-Mexico border in San Diego, California. And I am African-American, but I grew up around a whole bunch of Mexicans in particular during the 1980s. And my family did a real good job of teaching me my history, which I wasn't in school, but they taught me my history. But I didn't know my neighbor's history. I didn't know my friends' stories. The people that I loved, I didn't know their history. So in terms of these, people say it's all heritage history or identity history. It's like, for me, it's community history. I need to know who you are because I love you, right? And one way I connect with you is through understanding how we all showed up in this place together. So in doing these histories is important for all of us. It was important for me to know Mexican-American history. It felt like an absence, like something was missing in my life because I wasn't getting that at school and I wasn't getting that at home and it wasn't coming from anywhere. So I had to pursue it, right? In college and in graduate school. I mean, my whole career in many ways has been around filling that void. And so when we talk about identities, we often see it as about a me history. I guess maybe that's a me history, but my history is your history. My favorite thing to do on a Saturday night, you invite me to your house for a party, I'll probably have my laptop with me because I like to do genealogy. I like to know, bring me over, Rainey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do your genealogy, Darnell, whoever. Because I like to get to know who we are. I think all of our migration stories, whether they're international, global, or local, are important. And I just want to know how we all wound up in this family, this community, this conversation together. And that, for me, is the power of history. It's not genealogy, it's history, right? It's how we got to be in relationship together today.
Thank you. And my boss has told me that it's over. So I want to thank all of you all for coming and staying.